said, I did not do my internship with the Washington Wild Things this summer as much as I would have loved to spend my summer with these three guys right here. I did my internship at a local news station in Steubenville, Ohio, WTOV 9. So the things we'll go over first, the two supervisors I reported to and worked with pretty much the entire summer, some of the duties and responsibilities I had over the internship. Talk about one day where Jack and I, Jack will be on the next slide, but we went to Steelers minicamp and covered that the second day. We'll go over some of the challenges I had, lessons learned, and then one example of some work that I did. First off, my supervisors, first Rob Metzger, who's the sports director. He's been there since before 2010. He's been there for a long time, and he actually covered a lot of my dad's high school football games. My dad was a high school football coach for a long time in that market, so I had already known Rob prior to the internship. And then Jack Hillgrove, who is the second sports anchor for WTOV 9. He actually graduated from here in 2021. So that was something we had in common. We both, well, I go to Waynesburg right now, he was a Waynesburg alum, so it was really easy to get along with these two guys pretty much right off the bat. Some of the duties and responsibilities I had first was to shoot and edit highlights for high school baseball and softball. Pretty much as soon as I got there in that market area, high school baseball and softball playoffs were starting, and there was already a bit of a shortage of videographers that they had to go out and film highlights for those games. So pretty much on day one, I got thrown into the fire. They dropped me off at a high school baseball playoff game, and I'd film highlights for that, go back to the station, and edit those together to use in the nightly sportscasts. Create full screen and lower third graphics for those game highlights, a lower third graphic with the final score so everybody knows what the final score is, and then a full screen graphic for the 6 o'clock sportscast so everybody knew what highlights would be on at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So I helped create some of those graphics from time to time. Edit highlights for MLB games for the nightly sportscast. Obviously the summer it's baseball time, and in the market both Pirates fans and Guardians fans pretty much dominated. So I would do Pirates highlights and Guardians highlights if they played on that night, put those together, go through pretty much the entire game, pick out certain plays and spots, and put those together. I'd also help record interviews specifically during high school football media days and high school football previews, because the last about month of the internship, people in the area were starting to ramp up for high school football, and they do high school football media days, so I help either hold the camera or set up the microphone or do something in some way to help them record some of their interviews. Some of the other things that I did, I wrote scripts for the anchors to read during the sportscast from time to time as well. And then there was a 2-day span on the last week of July where both Rob and Jack were not able to be at the station, so I was the only sports guy at the station. So the anchors for the entire newscast would read sports. I put together the highlights, the scripts, and the graphics and everything for those 2 days. So I pretty much produced the 2-minute sports block for those 2 days. But even when Rob and Jack were in, sometimes I'd write their scripts for them. Organize footage from high school football practices for high school football previews. The last 2 weeks I was there, they would air high school football previews for area teams, and we would go out prior to that about a week or two before we air that team's preview and get footage of their practice, interviews with their coach. So I'd go through that footage and organize, okay, this player is number 80 from Buckeye Local, we want to highlight him. This is number 14 from Beaver Local, we want to highlight him. So I would organize that footage so it was much easier to go through it and put together those previews when that time came. And then I assisted in the production of high school football media days. That was 3 days at 3 different locations so that we could highlight and promote coverage for every one of the area high school football teams, because high school football in this specific market is a major deal to everybody that watches and pretty much everybody in that area. So even in the middle of July, we would be really ramping up high school football coverage, and I was still there for about a month, so I helped them with their media days. All right, Steelers mandatory minicamp. On June 12th, it was the second day of the Steelers 3-day mandatory minicamp. Jack and I went up to cover that. So a quick look at the schedule at 9:30. We checked in with security, and they took us to either the press conference, you either go to the press conference room or the indoor facility. They have a station set up for you to put all your stuff down, get yourself organized, and get ready for interviews and practice and stuff like that. We were in the indoor facility because there was only limited spots in the press room. And then at 11:45 to 12:15, that 30-minute stretch, that was the first locker room media session where media is allowed in the locker room to interview and talk to the players. I'm sure you guys have all seen stuff like that on SportsCenter. Players talking after a game. A lot of interesting sound bites have come from locker room media sessions. So the first one was from 11:45 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. Then at 12:30, offensive coordinator Arthur Smith and special teams coordinator Danny Smith both had simultaneous press conferences. Jack and I decided to film the Arthur Smith press conference because at the time he was a much bigger story to cover in the offseason than Danny Smith, so we did that at 12:30. Then once they were done at 1 o'clock, from 1 to 1:45, the media would be allowed to have lunch in the cafeteria. They had schedules for when the players would eat, when the coaches would eat lunch, and when the media would eat lunch, and when people that work for the organization but they're not players or coaches would eat lunch. So media's was 1 to 1:45, and then after you were done eating, you go back to your station, get all your stuff ready, and then go to practice from 1:55 to 4 o'clock. And that's the interesting thing. You're only allowed to film certain parts of NFL practices. You cannot film when they go 11 on 11 or 7 on 7 against each other because that is team activities against each other. You're not allowed to film that, but you are allowed to film individual drills and warm-ups and things like that. So you had to be careful with what you were filming and when you had your camera out. And then after practice at 4 o'clock, right after Mike Tomlin had his press conference from 4 to 4:15, right outside of the outdoor practice facility. And then once he was done at 4:15, there was another 15-minute locker room media session. The only person that talked that time was Russell Wilson, but for both the locker room media sessions, Jack let me pretty much run around with the camera and film whatever interviews he wanted to get. So that was pretty cool because I've seen on SportsCenter so many times all those locker room media interviews. So to be able to record that for Jack's Sportscast, I thought that was a really cool experience. Some of the challenges that I had, learning completely new video editing software, newscast rundown software. Here, we use something called Rundown Creator to put together our newscast rundown. And then for video editing, we use Adobe Premiere Pro. At WTOV 9, they used Avid Media software to put together their videos, and iNews to put together their rundown. So it was two things I had no prior experience with, so I had to completely relearn how to put together videos because buttons and different actions were different on Avid compared to Adobe Premiere Pro, and then iNews was different than Rundown Creator. And iNews, it was a little more advanced. You could put specific commands for the director and use the wipe animation to cut to these highlights or fade into these highlights or this full screen graphic. So I had to completely learn how to do that on the fly. I really didn't have a defined schedule. Most days I would work from 3:30 to 11:30 p.m. That was pretty much the early part of the internship. But there were some days where I'd get to the station at 6 in the morning because we had a 3-hour trip to Charleston, West Virginia for state track meets. There were some days I wouldn't even get there till 6 because there wasn't any local baseball or softball games. It was just the Pirates and the Guardians playing, so there really wasn't much to do other than watch those games and put those together and air the night the new sportscast. So I didn't have a defined schedule. It was basically going day by day and asking Robert, Jack, what time do you need me to come into the station today? What time are we working today? This and that. So that was a bit of a challenge, not having a defined schedule, not knowing when I would start and finish. And then being the new kid, I mentioned I did have prior experience with both Rob and Jack, but those weren't the only two guys I worked with. I worked with a lot of the other multimedia journalists and a lot of the other videographers, and those guys I had no prior encounters with, so I had to introduce myself to them and pretty much become friends with them because we worked a lot over the summer. So it took about a month to really get acquainted to the entire station with the anchors and the MMJs and the videographers. It did end up working out. All those guys were great. It was an awesome atmosphere at WTOV, but it took a while to get acclimated to that. And some of the lessons that I learned, time management, obviously there's hard deadlines with newscasts and sportscasts, especially with local news, because there's stuff we are the only ones covering, but in today's day of texting and social media, you can just ask mom, or you can ask a neighbor, somebody, how'd this game go? If we don't have highlights or coverage of that in time, then we pretty much lose credibility with the local audience. Putting together local sportscasts, knowing what the most important things are for local sportscasts, how to block things off, what goes first, what goes second, what to save for last. The importance of local news, there are still a lot of people that watch local news in this area, and it shocked me how many people recognize TOV9 and were like, oh, I watch this every day, I watch you guys every night, this and that. So there's still a lot of importance to local news and local news stations, even if they're small. And then obviously with the Steelers mandatory minicamp, how the NFL media operates on an average practice day. And then one of the work examples I have, which I will pull up here, this is the one of the high school baseball playoff games I filmed. It was the regional championship for a local team where they won. So not only did I film the highlights, but I also interviewed the winning coach and pitcher after the game.
As we headed to the bottom half of the first, Red Devils would respond immediately. Caleb Keenan
that, and then you can see it was pretty confusing in the end as to what happened, because you film the tag up, and then you put the camera down, okay, it's 5-2 now, and then you see them appeal the play in third, and they call them out there, and that was the end of the game. So that was a bit frustrating, but, you know, it is what it is sometimes. So that's it. Do you guys have any questions?
So, considering that you had to adjust to more new video editing software and within your role this year with new stats and all that, has that been something where you want to implement that so you add something that you don't have to keep transitioning, or do you not mind having to go straight back and run down Adobe?
I don't know if there's anything from Avid that I like better than Adobe. I will say I think Adobe, there's some things that are the same, like there's mark in and mark out and then bring video in. It's just, it was different controls with Avid, and I had to figure that out on the fly, and it was a little more difficult to find transitions and how to color correct and all that stuff. So to be honest with you, I like Adobe a little more than Avid, so I would try anything from Avid that is special to them with Adobe.
Thank you. Anything else?
All right, that wraps it up for our internship presentations today. Thank you everyone for coming out. We will be back in the spring, so look out for those. Thanks again for coming.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community Television.